Hey guys, it's James with Auto Odometer, and today we're going to be wet sanding these headlights on my 1997 BMW 328 IS. You can see that the passenger side headlight is definitely more oxidized and hazed than the driver's side, but we're going to go ahead and see what we can do to clean them up. Before we do any wet sanding, I want to make sure I'm sanding on a clean surface, so I just sprayed some soapy water and then I rinsed it off with some water and then dried it off before we started with the wet sanding. I'm going to be using 3 grades of sandpaper here. We're going to start with 600, wet sand it, jump up to 1500, and then go to 3000 grit before we do any compounding and polishing. I'll leave links in the description of where you guys can purchase products just like this. So before we start, I do tape off the edges so I don't scratch it. Now, you don't have to tape it off. This is my first time really ever wet sanding a headlight, so I just wanted to be extra cautious. And I started to realize that the more water that you start spraying on there, the harder it is for that tape to stay put. So if you're cautious enough and you can pop your hood, adding the tape really isn't that necessary. So once I was done with the 600 grit, I jumped up to the 1500 grit. Now I noticed that the 600 grit took off most of the oxidation or the yellow. So as I was sanding and spraying the water on it, I noticed that whatever was seeping down to the bottom of the headlight was that yellow oxidized layer of the headlight. Once I finished with the 1500 grit sandpaper and let it air dry, I jumped up to the 3000 grit. Now this 3000 grit is definitely a lot finer than the 1500 and 600, and when you glide it across the headlight, you can definitely feel that there's not as much resistance with some of the lower grades. After sanding out the passenger headlight with 3000 grit sandpaper, I went ahead and taped off all 3 other lights that I was going to work on. Now I figured I'd give these fog lights a try. They are a different type of plastic, and I almost thought they were glass, but they're just a harder plastic than the headlights themselves. I sanded all 3 of them down with the 600 grit, and then the 1500, and then finally the 3000, just like I did the passenger headlight. After finishing with the 3000 grit sanding step, I was thinking that I could spray a clear coat on the headlights and the fog lights, and that would help kind of shine and buff them out. I started with a wax and grease remover and then stepped up to the Duplicolor clear coat. After doing this to all 4 lights, there was a very hazy looking, almost like a gummy substance on the headlight, and I'm not really sure what went wrong. I'm not sure if I did the steps incorrectly, where I should have done the compound and polish before the spraying of the clear coat. But I went ahead with the compound and polish just to see if I was able to buff some of this out. After really trying to work this over, you can notice there right next to the body panel there's a pretty big clear coat drip, and I was noticing that I was not going to be able to get this out with an orange cutting pad and some Meguiar's compound. So what I had to do was I figured I'm just going to have to do this all over again. So I picked up my 600 grit, 1500 and 3000 grit, and I sanded all the way back down to a clear headlight. You might notice that the car is in a different position. This was probably after a month or 2 of just letting these headlights sit. After kind of brainstorming and maybe doing a little bit more research, I figured the only thing I could do was just go ahead and wet sand with the 600, 1500, and 300, do a compound and a polish. And I was going to skip the clear coat this time just because I wasn't really sure how to apply it, and I might try to tackle that here in the near future with some rust spots on some inconspicuous body panels. I did want to put some form of protection on since I wasn't going to try the Clearcoat again. So I went ahead and got some Griots Garage's Liquid Paste Wax. Now this is a natural carnauba wax, and it's probably only going to last a couple months, 3 to 4 months. And if you did notice, I did get a 3-inch polisher to make it a little bit easier to be able to polish these headlights. For the fog lights, I purchased some brand new ones off of eBay. And compared to the old ones, they definitely do make a pretty drastic difference. So here's the final product. If you remember, the passenger side headlight was the most oxidized and the most hazy. You can see that there is a pretty good reflection even from the trees in the background on these headlights. That liquid wax that I put on here, it said let it sit for 20 minutes and then buff it off. After I buffed it off, we have some pretty shiny looking headlights. Now I'll probably have to reapply that wax here every 6 months or so, just so the headlights don't become oxidized and hazy again. If you enjoyed that video, smash that like button. Also, consider subscribing. We're going to have tons more detailing videos like this, as well as some other general maintenance items, just to be able to keep my cars in tip-top shape. And remember, if you take care of your car is going to take care of you.